Welcome to the program. My name is Marty Shenkman, and I'm joined by a friend and colleague, Amanda Coplin, who's the expert in this area, and I'm just going to tag along for entertaining purposes. This is a a lot of reallys, important topic that just doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And my 2 cents, and Amanda, you may have a different feeling about it. It just kind of still sort of uncomfortable for people to talk about mental health issues. And we're going to go through some statistics. This stuff is not uncommon, and all advisors in all the allied disciplines need to address this because it is far, far more common than I think most people want to acknowledge. And the way to deal with it is to start off by recognizing it and then getting educated about it so you feel more comfortable dealing with it, and bringing in somebody who has the expertise to guide you where your expertise is limited. And we're going to say an awful lot more about that in the next hour, but I do think this is a really important program, and I hope it's helpful and practical. Just a couple of comments. We'll post the program to Shenkman Law /webinars. There's probably almost 200 webinar recordings and materials there that you can access anytime at your convenience. We don't give out CPE or CLE, but you should get a certificate of attendance if you can self-report. We cannot control them, so please don't email us. The general disclaimer I'm going to skip, but if somehow anything we say for any reason offends anyone, I apologize in advance. That's not our intent. Our intent is to educate and build awareness and help all of you deal with this really common and vitally important issue. Amanda, why don't you speak to some of the goals of what we're trying to do, and soon we'll get into some of the statistics to drive home how critical this is.
So there are really two goals of this presentation. One is to be proactive. I mean, whenever you can be proactive, you're always going to, one, feel more prepared, but two, have less anxiety about how to proceed, because a lot of the big issues that have been worked out happened up front. And now you've got an alignment and action to follow alignment. The second is to talk about productive ways to work with people who have mental health issues when you don't know in advance. I think along with what you said about the stigma, it could feel really hard to disclose to someone that you have schizophrenia, for instance. You have an addiction, you have an eating disorder, and not all of these things could be displayed in visual ways, if you will. Somebody who's medicated and has schizophrenia could appear very, very stable. But with schizophrenia, for example, people are on and off their meds all the time and could destabilize very quickly. And the worst way to find out is when someone gets off their meds.
I think one of the big challenges with estate planning, and Amanda, I don't remember if we have the following points in these materials, but I know we wrote about them. Wealthy people tend to feel more stigmatized, more self-conscious than more average wealth people with these issues. There's almost a presumption in society that, gee, if you're wealthy, how can you have an issue? It's, why should I try to be compassionate or concerned for you? What's your issue? You got plenty of money. And
Yeah.
it is very difficult for wealthier clients, and wealth is a relative term, so this can affect a pretty broad range of client wealth levels, but it gets harder, not easier, for them to deal with these issues in many cases. And you would think the opposite, because if somebody has financial wherewithal, they can send a beneficiary for treatment. They can send a beneficiary to a live-in facility where they can get, really the ultimate of available treatment options to help them. But the stigma can be very difficult. And I think what most advisors will find is that it's not uncommon for clients they're working with on an estate plan not to divulge this information. I can tell you that for many, many years, we've had several open-ended questions in our estate planning organizer to solicit this kind of information. And I was actually just thinking of it before we got on the program, Amanda. I don't know that anybody's actually put it in writing back to us saying, yes, we have a child, a beneficiary, an heir with, and list the issues. I just don't think that anybody's actually written it down. I think that's even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, just like some of the things that we were talking about before, denial, embarrassment, discomfort, those could all lead people to not disclose. And like, you've got to think about at the end of the day, whose responsibility is it to broach the topic? Is it the person who feels stigmatized, shamed, or embarrassed? Or is it the advisor, the trustee, and the estate planners? Is it their duty as people who are doing the planning to broach the issue and show that they're open to such vulnerability? Again, society sees a lot of mental illness as a moral failure instead of a disorder. The person who's depressed and can't get out of bed, we say, oh, they're lazy, they don't want it bad enough. The person who's struggling with addiction, well, why don't they just stop? Why don't they just stop using the drugs? The people with the eating disorders, why don't they just eat? They're making a choice. And so it just discounts a lot of biological factors that play into the maintenance of mental health disorders and further leads people to keep it silent. The other part is that clients may not appreciate the important role that their advisory team can play in crafting plans which do help their loved ones who are facing these challenges. So, for example, there's a client that I worked with who she did not want to, she had a very, very severe eating disorder, years of treatment. By the time we got to her, she had about 14 treatment centers under her belt. She was 21. And so she decided that she did not want to be over 80 pounds. And but she, in our family meeting, was able to identify that if she was under 73 pounds, then she was crazy. And she could identify that from the place she was at. And so she agreed to hand over her medical power of attorney at 73 pounds and then complete the course of treatment. But the big problem is her parents never followed through with meeting with the estate attorney, even though she had had these realizations and insights about herself at a higher weight. And so what that ended up looking like is because they didn't take the action and go to the estate planner as we had talked about, when she spiraled back under that place, she was no longer willing to hand over that medical power of attorney, and she could not see clearly anymore, despite knowing at a higher weight that that was the weight that made her crazy. And those were her words. So being able to get people in a place when they're stable, when they have these insights, is critical to planning for them when they get to a worse place.
Let me just build on a couple of comments you said. A lot of advisors, I don't think, appreciate the valuable role they can play in helping client families with these challenges. And again, we're going to come to some statistics to hopefully awaken you to how incredibly common these issues are. But for example, from a financial planning perspective, if somebody's gone through 14 treatment programs, consider the cost of that. What can a treatment program be, Amanda?
It depends on whether you can use your insurance or not. And here's the other thing. When either you don't make progress or you get to a point that you've made too much progress, insurance cuts and you have to do cash pay. So we're talking a copay could be 10 grand, could be 3 grand, depending on your insurance coverage. But once you start getting to private pay, it could be anywhere between $15,000 for an insurance-based program every single month, anywhere to $100,000 for all the bells and whistles. So it varies place to place and kind of the acumen of the staff and what they can afford under that umbrella. But your minimum you're looking at is 15 grand a month. And that's
So,
just for residential. Then you go down to IOP, which is intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization. Then you have all the treatment afterwards. And so you're looking at a long trajectory, which could be millions of dollars by the end.
so you can't do a financial plan, a retirement plan, or an estate plan without trying to dollarize, even if it's a coarse estimate, some of these costs and what it means. It's very common in estate planning to talk about equalization, but if you have a heir, and we'll use child in many of our examples, but it could be anyone. We're not trying to only focus on a nuclear family, but if you have a child that could need the kind of help, and this is a matter of life and death for many of the people struggling with these challenges, the cost is significant, and it may very well affect the general desire of quote unquote equal. And what does equal even mean if somebody's got a mental health or addiction issue that really their life depends on getting proper treatment? So the advisors, just from a financial perspective, need to deal with this. And I don't know if we have it in this program or not, Amanda. Are we going to talk about, for example, how you can work out an arrangement, perhaps an agreement between the trustee and the beneficiary as to a process for when distributions would get respected? Is that coming up later? I just don't recall.
We can make it come up later.
All right, so the point is that how you as an attorney draft a document to give certain express powers to a trustee could be significant. Some of the professional trustees are unwilling, uncomfortable, or ill-equipped to deal with these kinds of issues. And they may want certain types of decisions, like mandating drug testing, just as one of many, many examples, to be made by an individual in some type of fiduciary capacity. They may not have the wherewithal. They may not want the liability exposure if they do have the wherewithal. So having these kind of discussions with the trustee up front, if you anticipate or know these problems exist, is something that could really make a difference in how well the trust plan can function to protect this and all beneficiaries. So for example, if you need to have a separate individual co-trustee to address these issues, or a fiduciary, maybe you appoint a trust protector, trust director, to address these specific issues and name somebody. Perhaps your selection of trustees will depend on the skill set and willingness to get involved of a trustee, the experience level of a trustee. So these are all things to think about. And again, the point I was trying to make, to build on what Amanda had said, is addressing these challenges. We have the threshold issue: will the client be comfortable talking? Sometimes on a threshold issue, will the advisors be comfortable talking? But I think a lot of advisors don't appreciate the incredibly valuable role they can help play for clients with these challenges. So we need to really, as advisors, appreciate all that in order to get going. So I want that as background so that you, the listener, understand how vital and significant and helpful your role can be. Um, Amanda, we'd said earlier that we're going to do some stats, and I think you should, because I really do think that most people uh, um, really don't anticipate how common and significant these challenges can be.
Yeah, so you can look at the stats right there. And I think when you look at those stats, half of all chronic mental illness, those are the people that will ultimately end up in guardianship or, like need more planning or some kind of person looking out for them. They begin by age 14 and 3/4 by age 24. Look at those numbers, and you know that if the parents or the people planning are alive during that point, they could plan adequately with the knowledge in mind of who this person actually is. And so, for example, there's a woman we're working with, and she is estranged from her family members. Her parents are dead now, but she, like many people with schizophrenia, had her first psychotic break when she was in her 20s, when her parents were still alive. There were trusts created in order to look out for her because she's not the best with money when she's both manic and psychotic. And so it was meant for her to be treated and kept alive. That being said, somehow these trustees end up feeling like crisis counselors. They're harassed. They're sometimes the only people in this beneficiary's life who's not estranged from them, but they're tied to them by legal documents. And so these trustees, it's far beyond their pay grade to be able to help these people in a way that's meaningful. And to have trust documents that allow the trustee to bring on mental health professionals to help them guide and navigate the way forward is a critical thing for both the beneficiary and the trustee. Otherwise, trustees will continue to get off of somebody's case and pass the person from person to person to person, whoever will take the case, because these tend to be people who are not the most docile people. They tend to be more problematic for the people around them in trying to get their needs met and get what they want.
And when you say
It
needs, you mean, for example, drugs or whatever it could be.
could be their psychological needs, like connection. If they have pushed everyone away because they were psychotic or manic and it's hard to tolerate being around or in relationship with someone like that, sometimes the trustee is the only person picking up the phone. And that's a really lonely place to be as an individual. And that's also a really hard place to be as a trustee
Trustee.
who has a lot of other people that you're also working with who aren't as high needs as this person. So, there's a person that we're working with who has schizophrenia, schizoaffective, which is like bipolar plus schizophrenia. And she's in her 60s and she ended up in the hospital and they thought she was homeless at the hospital. Well, our team, we started tracking her down and we connected with her in the hospital and we've been able to help stabilize her after she was discharged from the hospital, but help in that planning process. The trustee didn't know where she had gone, why she wasn't answering. And because we were all working together, we managed to get her needs met, including getting the financial approval for getting her clothes in the hospital or other things set up like counseling after she left the hospital. But had we not been involved, that trustee, I don't know what he would have done. And I don't know what would have happened to the client either, to be honest, especially given the fact that they thought that she was homeless.
Amanda, I'm bad, so I apologize, and to the viewers too. Take 30 seconds. I mean, you're talking about all these sophisticated concepts and mental health issues that most of us are not very skilled at. Tell everyone what you do and your background. We should have started with that because I said you're
So
you're the expert. I'm here for the entertainment. So tell everybody why you're the expert.
So I'm a licensed professional counselor, which means I have a master's degree in counseling, and I have a business called Copeland Consulting that does concierge behavioral health services. So basically, I tell people we're the Navy SEALs of behavioral health services, and so we go into these high acuity situations, often with wealthy families, and we help stabilize situations that are untenable, both for people, like individuals, families, and the advisors around them.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we should have start next time. We make sure I start with that. All right, but the point of this slide, everyone, this stuff is not uncommon. Just look at the first line. And if you have not seen this in your practice, it's because you're not aware of it, not because it doesn't exist.
You're not
Um,
asking the right questions.
well, sometimes it's hard, to be fair to advisors. Sometimes it's really hard. Like we said, people are uncomfortable telling what's going on, and sometimes the people that have the challenges may not show it and don't want to discuss it unless it becomes necessary. So this
Right.
was something I mentioned earlier, but I think you should elaborate a little because it's a really important point, and I think another dangerous, dangerous misconception.
So there are unique issues that happen with wealth and mental health. Like Biggie Small said, more money, more problems, right? It's absolutely true. And so these high net worth individuals, the children, are more susceptible for higher rates of substance use, depression, eating disorders, anxiety. And a lot of it, there are different reasons, but high performance pressures, there's the veneer of what you're supposed to be like, look like, act like. Um, and then there's just the reality that there's not a whole lot of adult supervision. Sometimes there's nannies, but not a whole lot of adult supervision in terms of limiting what people are and aren't doing. Um, so these children are also suffering higher rates of anxiety at 20 to 30% higher than less affluent kids, and they're more likely to also display antisocial behaviors like cheating or stealing. Again, it's the lack of consequences for different behaviors.
So contrary to what we would anticipate, these issues can be greater for our wealthy clients, not less. And again, if you're not seeing these issues, you're probably missing it because it's there. And it may mean that the clients aren't, I'm not casting doubt or fault or blame on anyone, but the clients may not be communicating it. You may not have the contact with the beneficiaries. Even trustees may not be aware of it if their contact is limited and they don't get involved enough on a personal basis with the heirs. But these problems are real and they're prevalent. What are some of the reasons, Amanda, for this coming about?
So we talked about before the pressure to achieve, the isolation from parents, but also the parenting styles, like a lot of this failure to launch is because there's a lot of emphasis put on monetizable skills and education versus things that people have done for them their whole lives. Like if you had a maid, you don't make your bed, you don't clean your place. And so failure to launch oftentimes comes down to a lack of necessity at an earlier age, which instills these habits in people as they grow older.
My impression in some cases is that sometimes our incredibly high achieving clients are so involved in whatever profession, business endeavor that they're high achieving at, that they don't put the same, and it's not just time, but I'll call it quality time, into rearing their children in some of the same ways. And I think that comment would probably upset a lot of people, but we see the statistics. It's a concern. And we can't negate what Amanda said a minute ago in terms of the pressure to succeed that these children often feel when their parents are so incredibly successful. And it can really create difficulties and a stress. Amanda?
Yeah, the other thing that I really want to bring up too, in living with some of these families and talking to some of these children, the one thing that I've also realized is that sometimes the only way that they've gotten their emotional needs and attachment needs met is when they're sick and not okay. And so, when they have an eating disorder, then everybody huddles around, everybody, pays attention. And when they're well, they just become invisible. And so, that's a really hard thing to give up. When you're asking someone to be well, what you're also asking them is to let their parents go about their lives and back to the way things were. And you begin to see how some of these issues are really intertwined in a deeper way, and how family therapy can really help give the parents also light into some of the things they could do in facilitating the solution, even though they weren't aware of all the things that fed the problem. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say so that people understand what you mean and where you get these insights. Amanda and her team will live in with a family, for example, when a child or other heir family member gets out of treatment and comes home, they'll be there in the house with the family to help transition. So Amanda witnesses and sees, and her team does, these interactions on a regular basis, and that's where the knowledge that she's giving you these comments comes from. I don't think you addressed the first point, and I think that's kind of at least it was startling to me in terms of
You know,
empathy.
it's somewhat startling to me. But also in living with a lot of these families, I understand it on a deep level, because when you've worked with the fix my kid parents, or this is the last embarrassment that I have in my life that I need you to fix, you understand that they're disconnected from the suffering and just trying to buy a solution to the problem when they are a part of the solution to the problem. And it's their empathy, in fact, that would be the bigger solution to the problem than any dollar amount. And so I think as you get to be more powerful, you think that there's only a matter of a cost to anything that you want, and you disconnect from the suffering or feelings of other people around you.
So Amanda, if that's actually been documented, might it not be challenging as an advisor to get the parent, for example, to even focus on bringing in someone like yourself to provide help if they're not really being empathetic? How do you get them to focus on it? Maybe that's part of the reason they're not communicating to their advisors what's going on.
Well, all these parents know there's a problem. That's why they're trying to buy the solution. But I think that it leaves the advisor to be more empathic with the person, like the parent who's coming in to do the estate planning, and say, listen, I know that this is an issue in your life, and I know that you want to find a solution. I imagine that you haven't been able to find one, or you would have paid for it and been able to create the results you want. And so, because this is important to you, I want to introduce you to a couple other solutions that may be more tailored and customized in a way that meets your needs. And so, if you can figure out what's important to someone as an advisor, then it doesn't matter necessarily at that point whether that person, the parent, is empathic towards the child or the person struggling, or not, because as long as you've tapped into what's important to them, they'll move forward in a solution. And then it's up to the therapeutic team to help empathy build later down the road.
Goal one, Amanda.
So, like I said, proactive is always better than reactive. And so being able to discover whether people have a mental health issue or not is really important. And part of what you also do is ask about a family history, which gives you probability of whether they will or not struggle in the future. So we could go to the next slide.
Can I
So,
interject before you do that?
yeah.
Let me give an example. Maybe it'll help people. And if it's not a good example, you can shoot me down. I had a client many years ago. The husband called me and wanted estate planning done. And after, the typical introductory conversations, introductory discussions, and so on and so forth, he said, listen, my wife has bipolar disorder. And then we spent a fairly significant amount of time talking about her status and some of her challenges. And one of the concerns was he really wanted to leave or enable her to have as comfortable and as empowered of an existence financially as she could, but at the same time to provide protection for her. And one of the things I kind of created to help address those dual, sort of almost conflicting goals was we created in her social security number a separate account that the trustee of the trust that was created would fund. And it was done under her name and social security number so that if something negative, bad outcome happened, it wouldn't taint the trust where most of the money was. And the arrangement was that there was a credit card, check writing privilege, and a cash card. I guess this was years ago when people still wrote checks and everything wasn't just, tap, tap. And she could write a check or withdraw cash or do anything that she wanted without micro constraint, for lack of a better term. But if the trustee noticed that the expenditures were getting wild or out of control or on inappropriate things, the amount of money in that account was limited. If the expenditures were reasonable and there was, ongoing communication so that the trustee would have input not just from the financial results that they saw, but from communications with her, they would not replenish the account. If everything seemed fine and there was no alarms, they would replenish the account. So it gave her the wherewithal to go about her life no different than anyone else and spend and live however she chose. But if the expenditures or the communications evidenced an issue, they could hold off on replenishing the account until they could make sure that the circumstances were safe and appropriate for her. And again, that's an example, and Amanda, please comment, but that's an example how as a draftsperson, and the financial advisor was involved too in setting up and monitoring the account, you can create a mechanism to help the particular client that has a challenge. Amanda?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think this is part of what you explain during your initial onboarding process is that everybody has unique life circumstances that will either facilitate freedom or take away freedom. And so you can even say examples like somebody who is medication dependent for stabilization because they have schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, another thing like that. When they are off their meds, then they tend to make poor financial decisions that impact their future forward. And that one of the things that you want to be able to talk about is what does that look like for them in their life? And how can we preserve the maximum amount of freedom that they want for themselves and the lifestyle they want for themselves by making decisions in advance? Because a lot of people, when they're manic, they are spending amounts of money that can be incredibly destructive. Same with addiction, same with psychosis. And when they stabilize, there's a lot of regret. And so what you want to be able to do is prepare them for that line of questioning by stating all of those things so that they know very clearly what your intent is. Otherwise, if you don't prepare someone, they start to get suspicious. Along the way, ask them, is that okay with you? Get mutual agreements, get them, the clients that are beyond the onboarding process, get them to them aware that you went to this presentation and that you want to do things differently because you know the statistics now where you might not have before. And then just go back to your mutual agreements if something were to ever come up. So for instance, a mutual agreement might be, so if you destabilize and you show XYZ symptom that you just told me, is it okay if I freeze the credit card until we're able to have a conversation? And like, if that was the mutual agreement, then the person will say, yes, you write it down, make sure that everything is written down so that you both are on the same page and you can even get it notarized.
And that can be a separate document. And it may be that a trustee with a typical broad discretionary authority for distributions can impose or agree to those types of restrictions or arrangements with the beneficiary within the context of their broad discretion. But you want to make sure at the outset, if this is a known issue or even a potential issue, that you draft to give the trustee the flexibility to do these things. And I would guess, Amanda, that some advisors, attorneys, for example, that are hearing the comments you just made may feel uncomfortable because they may not have the background, let's say medically, to be able to have that discussion. But that's why you bring in, and that's when you bring in a mental health professional to be part of the conversation. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good thing. And if we've just built enough awareness so that when you see an issue that you realize you can play a vital role in and you're not sure what to do, bring in a consultant. That's the way to help. The other piece to keep in mind, and I think it's probably much more of an issue for attorneys than other advisors that may be involved, is the attorney-client relationship. Who are you representing? You're probably, in this case, probably not representing the beneficiary, but perhaps the parent who was the settlor of the trust or the other benefactor who was the settlor of the trust. You may be representing the trustee. So you just have to be mindful of that when you start to engage in these conversations or choose not to and have somebody else carry forward on the conversation. But those things need to be addressed, but they can be, and it's not a reason not to deal with these issues.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also want to say that people have varied comfort levels with having these conversations. And I have been brought into many, many rooms where I've helped navigate these conversations because the trustee is so afraid of saying something offensive, or the estate planner just doesn't know where to go with the questions to ask as far as the things that could happen when somebody has schizophrenia, or, and they're just afraid. It's okay to be afraid. It's not okay to not ask. Bring in the right people so that you can conduct the conversation. And I promise it'll have high yield down the road when you get into a predicament, because you will with this population.
What about the questionnaires that we try to use, whether you're a financial advisor, accountant, attorney? We all use questionnaires and organizers to solicit information.
So the really, really interesting thing about a lot of studies on suicide is that if you ask someone face to face if they are suicidal and have a plan, a lot of the times they'll deny. But if you ask them in a written form, a lot of the times they'll be honest and say yes if they are in fact feeling suicidal. And
Wow.
so what that tells me is that people feel more comfortable writing it on a piece of paper and then having a conversation than they do looking at someone's face and having that shame and judgment and everything they fear mirrored back to them. Because if you're feeling suicidal, you're already in a place where you're feeling really fragile. So being able to start by asking these questions on paper and then taking the conversation off paper will get you likely more answers than if you just started just in the context of a conversation.
Amanda, in a lot of cases, the organizer or questionnaire that I'll give out will be to, let's say, a parent who's creating the trust structure and plan for a child or other family member with these challenges. Will they know how to answer these questions? How do you get the individual with the challenges involved directly?
I think if you go back to the stats of when these cases of mental health issues start to emerge, every parent knows if their kid has a mental health issue, and they've been likely dealing with it for a long while prior to coming to you. They may not know what to do with it, or the treatment attempts that they've had maybe failed, but they definitely know that there's an issue.
Let me make another comment. And this is a comment that I make in a lot of different webinars on a lot of different contexts, but I am a zealous believer in a team approach. And one of the reasons in the context of this discussion here, that a team approach is so vital, different people have different comfort levels, different people have different relationships with the client. I had a client that had been a client for decades, and I recommended them because they really needed it to a wealth advisor, because they really had, their stuff was a mess and it wasn't under control, and I needed projections done. And it was the wealth advisor, after 2 meetings with them, came back and was telling me some of the personal challenges in the family that after 20 years these people had never told me. There was something, about his personality, his demeanor, his approach. I don't know what it was, but you don't know up front which advisor may hear which information. And a lot of times each advisor hears different pieces of the puzzle. And when you put the puzzle together, it starts to get figured out. So a financial advisor may know that there have been some large expenditures and not quite sure what they're for and can't really get a distinct answer, but trying to deal with them and putting together a budget and a forecast. And then maybe, the attorney or the insurance person has heard some of the concerns, and you piece it together. So a team approach is really, really important. And a final comment, which I think is really important, and again, it depends on the context, but we often limit the estate planning team to the CPA, the attorney, and the wealth advisor. Bad mistake. It may need an insurance consultant. Apropos to our topic today, it may need a mental health professional, may need a social worker, may need both. The point is, bring in whatever expertise is needed on the team so that team can really meet the needs of the client. And I think we've illustrated it a couple points in the most recent one with the bipolar mechanism for a bipolar client that I discussed, where you can both empower and protect a client with some creative drafting and planning. And that should really be done. Questionnaires are a great way to solicit information, but get the team involved, piece together the information, see what you can find out. Do you want to comment further on some of these additional questions?
No, I think that these are pretty self-explanatory. I think the purpose of all these questions is to solicit answers and important information that you wouldn't get in just a general conversation that most estate planners have in their planning process.
I think that's true, and I think that's very common. And I think one of the reasons that happens is, and I'm going to blame it on the clients, not our colleagues, is clients, how much is a will? How much is a revocable trust plan? You know, we shouldn't do work like that, even though that's what a lot of clients think they want. I don't know what the issues are that a client has when they come in the door. And sometimes they're mental health issues, sometimes they're drug addiction issues. More often than it should be, they're very bright people are just spending themselves into oblivion because they just love this stuff and don't want to look at numbers. Uh, there's always issues. There's always problems. Nobody has the same situation. And if we as professionals let clients push us into, yes, we'll do a flat fee Rev Trust estate plan for X dollars. You you got to make a living. You got to feed your family. That's part of why you do this. You might like helping people, but you're not going to spend the extra hour or two or three having these discussions if the client's holding your feet to the fire. And that's something that I think as a profession we really need to look at. And I don't want to get too far afield, and I'm going to do a program on this soon because I think it's really interesting and important. But with the advances of AI, with the significant increase in involvement that financial planners are having in the estate planning process, some of that and a lot of that in the future fueled by the AI programs they have that can help them do estate planning even if they have a limited background in it. We as estate planning advisors need to focus on all these human elements of planning. That can't be automated. That AI is not going to be able to have these discussions for a long time. And I'm not sure somebody's going to be happy having this kind of detailed personal discussion with Hal. You're too young to know
Yeah.
who Hal is.
It's interesting because sometimes people say to me, $1,000 for your assessment. Well, this treatment center over here, they said that they'll do the assessment for free. Well, yeah, theirs is 15 minutes minus 5 hours, and we come out with a very bespoke plan for your needs and, to move forward in a way that you feel comfortable with and you know what it looks like versus someone putting you in a cookie cutter program and saying, oh, this is what you get for 15 minutes and free. So you've got to be able to show the ROI of the investment for what it will look like moving forward versus, people will always complain about money, always complain about money. But I show them what they lose by keep going the insurance route, and they already know that they've lost not only time but money, and it's typically gone worse.
I don't think I know a single estate planner, even those that are more generalists than specialists, that can't have a hugely valuable contribution. If nothing else, just all the decades of experience, and this is critical, your independence. Clients are so often so involved in whatever's going on that things that even a young professional can see just because they're not involved in it can be incredibly valuable. Stop letting clients pressure you to do a fixed fee dollar value plan with no planning. They need your
Yeah.
guidance. They need your guidance. I wish we could make Harry Potter magic wand and make clients understand that. And if you consider 1 in 5 people have a mental health issue, is that the right stat? Did I quote it correctly?
Yep. You're right.
You need clients need what we can do. They need what we're talking about. Um, Trust administration and policy and procedure. Amanda spoke about this, but again, you need the framework within the trust, such as, for example, a broad discretionary distribution power so that an independent trustee can say to the beneficiary with an addiction issue or any other challenge, listen, I want to sit down with you and work out a series of agreements for when, how, and how much we will distribute to help you out. We're here to help you. We want to help you, but we need some parameters. You got to make sure that the basis for that is in the trust document. You also have to make sure that the trustee selected is not just a family member. And I'll go back to what Amanda was saying about costs, because sure, Aunt Jane, she won't charge us any money. Yeah, but Aunt Jane is not going to take, the pressure of a beneficiary with a challenge calling her 22 times in one day. So it's
Well,
really important to select the right trustees and have the document tailored appropriately.
I think the other really key thing about Aunt Jane is, what if Aunt Jane is the last person that has an attachment to the struggling beneficiary? And by making her the trustee, you've created a power dynamic that ruins the last tie that
Right.
existed.
That's actually an interesting point, because Aunt Jane, somebody may say, well, she gets along with our daughter, and our daughter's got some struggles, and Aunt Jane's the one person that can talk to her. And you know what? I never thought about it till you said it, but that may make Aunt Jane the worst person, because you don't want to put her in a position of having to provide guardrails for the child with the challenges. Let her still have that relationship. Good reason for an independent trustee. Amanda, one of the things, and I think your last bullet point on this slide about slowing down impulses and protecting against destructive symptoms, why don't you comment on that? I think we talked about it a little bit. I think it's worth bringing up again how an agreement can do that.
So there's a couple of things you could do. One is say, look, the policy that we have and the procedure we have is that we don't approve distributions over XYZ amount for 3 days, 4 days. And so somebody who's struggling with addiction needs a fix today. And so being able to drag time out, it's tactical patience, and it allow you to have the information that you need that you weren't privy to before in order to make the best decision in the situation, given the information you have, and that will become revealed as time progresses. Part of it could be, we don't give distributions over XYZ amount without a face-to-face conversation, where we talk more about the ramifications of that distribution on your future financial future. So there are different things that you can put in place that will actually help all parties to remain in control and make better decisions moving forward.
So let me just take a step sideways on this for a second for advisors. Many of the trusts that are created in trust-friendly jurisdictions because of legal and tax benefits that jurisdiction provides. And some of the administrative trust companies in those jurisdictions are very, very careful not to have an entity in other states, because they don't want to create a situation where they're subject to jurisdiction in those other states. Now think about what Amanda just said. If you're going to use as one of the guardrails or safety nets, we don't make distributions over X dollars without a face-to-face meeting 3 days after the request. Well, if the trustee doesn't have a physical presence in the jurisdiction where the beneficiary lives, how's that going to happen? So that may mean setting up another function within the trust. It could be some type of trust director, individual name that can have input on these things. It could be selecting a different trustee. But the point is to think through the mechanisms that may be used at the outset when you have knowledge of this, and draft and plan accordingly.
It could also
Gold,
be something as simple as Zoom, right?
if the decision is made that that's adequate in lieu of a face-to-face meeting. I mean, sometimes depending on the situation, I think you might want an actual real face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're looking at in terms of the disorder, the symptomology. But I think also, if we're talking right now and you're just looking at this little box, you may not notice if my legs are bouncing. You may not notice that there's squalor all around me, but then you could say, hey, Amanda, will you take me on a tour of your apartment really quick? You know, I just want to see what things are looking like these days. And now suddenly all of it's revealed. That might give you more information than if I came to your office and we were meeting face to face.
It's a very interesting point, and I'm going to prove that I'm a lawyer. It depends. But I have found that seeing people on Zoom is more revealing and helps me understand the client better. And I never thought this before COVID than a face-to-face meeting. Because when people used to come to my office, we do almost everything on Zoom now. When people used to come to my office, I realized that sometimes people that had challenges or other issues, they prepped themselves for the meeting. They picked a time where they know they would be at their best. They may have gotten dressed specifically for the meeting. When someone does a meeting on Zoom, the crazy dog may go out on the balcony and start howling. I said that on purpose. They may have, their favorite snack. They may have their fuzzy slippers. You see the surroundings around them. You see the Buddha on the wall. You learn something about them that when you're in the sterile confines of a lawyer's conference room, you may not see. So I think it depends. I could see in certain situations, just the fact of making that person come down to the meeting may help me assess different things. In other cases, I like seeing their real environment. And like Amanda said, oh, that's what's really going on of a Zoom meeting. Yeah, give me a quick tour of your house. I'm curious. So I think we're up to goal 2.
Right. So, like we said, sometimes the topic won't get brought up, and then you'll find out in other ways this person seems to be struggling with a mental health issue. What do I do? So, beneficiaries could destabilize for all kinds of reasons. Could be a relapse when they have an addiction, could be a first psychotic break or a bout of symptoms. It depends on how old that person is, and whether their medication is stable and for how long. They might have decided to just stop taking their medications. A lot of people with serious mental health issues feel like medications dampen their affect, make them a zombie, take away a superpower. It's a lifelong journey where a lot of them are on and off their medications. And sometimes, especially when you're looking at women that are past a certain age, their stress and hormone levels shift, and they may go into menopause, premenopause, and that will change the effectiveness of different meds along with mental health symptoms. So this can take you off guard, and it can make you unsure of how to relate to that person or what to do next. You may find yourself saying, oh my gosh, I'm always anxious around them. I don't know if they're going to yell at me. I don't know if they're going to be kind to me. When you pay attention inside of yourself, it typically gives you information that something's not right here and it needs more investigation.
What might we notice?
So somebody who's paranoid may start changing their communication style, or if they're struggling with addiction. And, we've all been on the phone with that friend who's drunk at midnight, slurring their words, telling you how much they love you and all the kinds of different things. So you're my best friend. So it could be a change in communication style in terms of they move from talking to you on the phone to only writing emails. It could be the words and the phrases that they use where you're like, that doesn't sound like that person. It could be the consistency. It could be consistent excuses why they can't get on the phone or Zoom with you. Random requests for money or liquidation of assets, abrupt changes in the estate plan, logical thinking. People with psychotic disorders will often display paranoia about governmental things, spiritual things, where it just doesn't seem to click in the same way and should lead you to ask more questions. Noticeable, frequent, or incongruent mood changes, very typical of bipolar. Poor money management. I think poor money management alone isn't always a sign of mental health issues. Sometimes people who were never put on a budget just don't know how to manage money. but it should be something that leads you to say, hey, wait, we got to ask more questions here. Higher medical bills is always one. The client just tells you directly, or a family member tells you directly.
So let me make a couple of comments. Attorneys often have issues. Who are you representing? Who's your client? But if you have a client that has these kind of challenges, you need input from other people that are in the environment, whether it's family, friends, a significant other, etc. Um, so you need to address that. You may want to see if there's a way you can have the particular client, if you're representing the beneficiary, approve communications with these people. If you're representing the trustee, maybe this is part of the trustee's duties of communicating. Maybe the trustee has these communications and then relates them to the professional. The comments on money management is why I said earlier, it's a team sport. If you have, and I love having a CPA monitor monthly or quarterly expenses for somebody because they understand numbers. They sometimes can sniff out or identify an issue that someone else doesn't get. It's not so much just the flagrant overspending that we see of so many clients, wealthy or not, but it's a change in the pattern of spending. Like just something's weird. Why these numbers don't make sense now? There was a pattern for many, many months, and all of a sudden there's these much larger expenses for weird things. Well, maybe the person is buying stuff that they can, with a credit card, they can go sell, get cash, and buy drugs. But you want a financial professional or accountant or trustee with the acumen to do it, to monitor this stuff. I've seen situations where really well-known, astute, supposedly astute trustees have seen hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of weird expenses like sudden travel expenses and other things going, and just never blew the whistle because the person's worth a lot of money. It's not only the relative value or the absolute value of the dollars, but it's where they're going for, what it's being used for. So you really do want that monitoring. Again, a team sport. Financial advisor may not think they have a role, or the accountant, in dealing with a beneficiary with mental health issues, but they absolutely do. And they may pick up on this or just sense something that, a lawyer or even a mental health professional is not going to pick up on. Like funny, odd
Yeah,
expenses. Why are they for this category?
money tells a story.
Yeah, yes. And you have to keep your ear to the railroad track, so to speak, to hear it.
Yeah.
Um, so more issues. We've covered some of these. You want to make any further comments?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're an estate planner and someone's planning for a beneficiary, right, or a client directly who has a family member struggling, I've definitely had clients who have needed to liquidate assets. They're cash poor, even though they're asset rich. And so, in order to pay for treatment, they've had to sell a house or liquidate stocks or different things like that. And that's a great time to say, hey, what's going on here? Because I really want to be able to help you in a better way than just liquidating these assets. And maybe that looks like connecting you with somebody who could actually help you navigate the system. Because with private equity's takeover of the mental health field, you can end up in some really bad places and pay again and again and again and again. And if you don't have the right person navigating that system, it could be a huge drain on somebody's everything up to their retirement. So being able to ask that question is important. Um, yeah, I mean, family members know if they're living with somebody and somebody's destabilized. So they might have their adult children living with them. And they're not acting in a caregiver capacity. You might say, that's really interesting that your 40-year-old is living with you. Like, is everything okay? Money or assets being funneled away. I think the really sad and unfortunate part when you're struggling with addiction is that you will do anything to get the drug, and that means stealing from your parents, and it's something that happens quite a bit. And you may see parents coming back and saying, "Hey, we need to liquidate some assets because my kid just sold everything in our house, and we have nothing." So. I think is really important just to be aware of some of the signs of a family member having the issue, not necessarily even your client.
I've had a number of occasions over the decades of practice where a new client would come to me and they had disinherited a child in their existing will. And I said, why are you doing that? And it wasn't necessarily a conversation they wanted to have, but I said, I can't disinherit a child if you can't explain to me why. I don't have to necessarily, and I probably won't state the reason in a document in the will, but I'm going to put it in my memo to the file. But I'd like to understand why you're doing that. That's a pretty dramatic, significant step to disinherit a child. Why are you doing it? And there have been many cases where the parents had disinherited a child because the child had an addiction or mental health issue, and they thought that the money would have only been used to harm the child, and they just didn't want to do that. And yet they never had that conversation with the lawyer that wrote the will disinheriting the child. The lawyer, their prior lawyers, the client said they wanted to disinherit X, and so the lawyer wrote down that's what they want and disinherited the child. But once I engaged them in conversation, in a number of cases, I found out there were addiction issues and other problems. And they didn't understand that they could do the kind of planning that Amanda and I have been talking about. They didn't understand they could set up a trust and have really tough guardrails where the money could only be used if determined to be helpful and appropriate, to name an institutional trustee so that the kid with the challenges couldn't call and harass the institution, and build in some of the safeguards we've talked about. And realizing that, even though they were not easy conversations, was just an incredible release for the clients to realize they could actually use the money to constructively help the child and nonetheless still protect the other children and not involve a family member in having to deal with the challenges that it involved. So very important, and it does come up. And I think one of the key things that we as advisors have to do is listen a lot, ask open-ended questions. Why? Why are you doing that? What's that about? Is there a concern? Open-ended questions and listen. And again, that's why I like having collaboration with other advisors, because they heard something, I heard something, we start to piece it all together. How do you respond, Amanda?
I think why is a question that puts us all on edge. So avoid things which put people on the defense. You can get to the why without saying, well, why'd you do that? And your
No, no,
tone
no.
also has,
This was with the parents, not with
right.
the child with the challenge.
No, I get that. But like I think why in general and people's tone has a lot to do with people's reactions in terms of whether they become defensive or not, right? And your relationship with them. So, being able to say, I really want to understand more about that. Will you share with me more about how you came to that conclusion or what you're trying to create by disinheriting that person so that I could help you come to the best outcome? Being able to um, avoid coming across as defensive yourself. So when somebody tells you, um, you need to do this, or you're not doing your job, or, the things that make all of us feel defensive of like, what do you mean I'm not doing my job? Or what do you mean I did this wrong? Or what do I think being able to control your own emotional reaction is really important. And then avoid escalating your tone, volume, and body language. So the folded arms or the kind of the cocky pose of like leaning back in your chair and just looking at somebody. Your body language says a lot more than your actual words. And in fact, nonverbal communication is 85% of communication. Avoid shutting down the conversation with blanket statements. Well, that's just the way it is. You're going to have to accept that. There's nothing more I could do. You want too much. All the things that shut down a conversation and pigeonhole it. And then avoid making promises you can't make or you can't keep. So don't tell someone you're going to fix it if you can't. Or if there's a part you could fix, as in the legal documents, let them know I could fix this part. And I think using these people over here to help you with the other part would be a really good idea in being a total solution to the problem you're facing today.
Yeah, I don't know that as lawyers or financial advisors, accountants, we're fixing these things, but I know we can help. I know we can help. So
It's a big part of
I
helping.
can't promise anything other than we can help if you'll share with me enough information so I can give you some ideas of what we can do. But we can help, and it can make a big difference. So how do we respond, Amanda?
I think the same way you want someone to respond to you. Stay non-judgmental and open. Understand your limits, what their needs are that they're trying to get met in that moment, and validate and restate their needs and perspective so that you make sure there's always alignment before there's actions. If you do not have alignment, every action will be wrong and ding the relationship that you have.
Why don't you define alignment? What do you mean? Give an example.
If I think that your goal is to disinherit your child, your true goal is to protect your child while also looking out for their well-being, I'm going to miss the mark because I didn't ask more questions. And the document I designed won't necessarily be in alignment with what it is you were looking for. And there's always going to be something in you that's uneasy about what just happened and how we move forward together.
Okay, good. More?
Asking relevant questions. I think we've all been in those situations where people's words and actions aren't aligning. So their body language seems to shift, but they're saying, oh, yeah, and kind of agreeing and nodding along. But being able to say, I just noticed that your body language shifted, even though your words are in agreement. I'm wondering, are you okay? Is there something I could do to help make sure that this is clear or understand what made you just shift right now? Help them play the tape forward on their options. You say, look, we could disinherit this child, but this is what it looks like moving forward. We can also create guardrails and trustees and different estate planning documents that will also allow them to get treatment anytime that they need it and also provide for their housing and the times when they are in recovery. And this is what that could look like moving forward so that you're informing them on what their future could be by planning in certain ways. Get clear on your goal, state your goal. My goal is to help you. My goal is to make sure that I understand so clearly your dreams that I could play them in my head like my own and write a document that could help those come to fruition. But in order to do that, I need to make sure that I understand. I ask as many questions as I need to. Is that okay? Is that okay with you? And then see what their goal is in your meeting and make sure that it aligns. And then create mutual agreements moving forward.
With these type of sensitive topics, and it happens in a lot of areas of estate planning, health issues, mental health issues, disability issues, religious issues, especially when there's strong emotional differences between different family members. Is it okay if I ask you about? Can we talk about? You're asking permission. If they give you the permission, it's harder for them to get upset if you start to delve in. But we can't do our jobs without asking questions and getting information. There's no way we can anticipate what could happen, especially in this area, in this topic. Oops, sorry about that. Any more to say on this, Amanda?
I mean, I think one of the things I talk about all the time is the metaphor of calling 911. So if somebody calls, if somebody's on the street grabbing their chest, you don't start playing Grey's Anatomy and check, start cracking their chest open and like taking control of the situation. You're not a doctor, and maybe you don't even have CPR training. Like no one has that expectation of you. But what they do expect and what you're trained to do from the time you're younger is look for warning signs that somebody might be in a medical emergency. One of those is grabbing your chest. But you start asking appropriate questions. Are you okay? Do you need help? Someone might say, oh, yeah, I just had spit go down the wrong tube. Thanks for checking. But someone may also stop responding. And that's a time to know the relevant resource, which is not the museum, it's 911. And so when you're so trained to do that, it just becomes an automatic thing. So you take the action of calling 911, and then they tell you what to do. And then as soon as 911 gets there, you follow up with the people present and then you give them everything you need them to know and you walk away. It's the same thing here. You're not expected to be a mental health counselor, but you are expected to know the relevant resources and to be able to take the action of connecting the two parties with their permission, obviously, and then following up. I want to make sure that you got connected with XYZ person. That way I know that you're in good hands. Did you make the call? If they say no, you say, I'm wondering what obstacles are standing in your way and how I can support you in getting connected. Is there anything I can do to be of service in making that connection happen?
And it may not be inappropriate if you're working on an estate plan and you need the input from the mental health professional to design the plan, the documents. If you need to coordinate with their financial advisor or trust officer to suggest that you need that input or you need the follow-up with the mental health professional in order to do the pieces of the planning that you're trying to do.
Hmm. That's the 911 metaphor we talked about.
Yeah, I
And
was off
then,
on the slide. Sorry, everybody.
no, you're good. That's the, okay. So then how do you be a part of the solution? Well, 3 effective ways: normalize, ask, provide. So normalize the discussion. 1 in 5 people struggle with a mental health disorder. It's really common among wealthy families. In fact, more wealthy families struggle with anxiety, depression, addiction than people without money. So what I realize is it's incredibly important for me to ask these questions. So I'm going to ask you some direct questions about these issues. And then you're going to provide support by offering reassurance, resources, respect. Everybody wants to feel respected, and nobody expects you to be the full solution. If you're an estate planner, that doesn't mean you're a doctor or an engineer. Like, you have a specialty, other people have a specialty, and all you need to do is connect.
And assuring them that you may be able to help. You can tailor the planning to help, not fix, but help. I think gives people encouragement to want to engage you, because most clients I don't think understand the kind of things that we've talked about in this program and how the planning and the financial and estate and related advisors can help.
So things to remember: the situation, feelings, level of importance, and intensity feel very real for the beneficiary. Then remember questions to move you forward. And of course, in Texas, always remember the Alamo.
You got to relate that. I explain that, please.
You've never heard Remember the Alamo?
Of course I did, but I'm trying to connect that to our program. So help me out here. I'm a little slow.
That's okay. It's just a good idea it's just a good way to anchor this slide in people's heads.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm going to let you take the next one, and I think we're almost done.
Yep. So back to the questions that move you forward. Good questions will help you get in alignment, lower defensiveness, and find a path forward. Here are some examples of what that could look like. And it's like they're just different paragraphs. So Marty, if you
Amanda,
want to try to read one.
these are comments to the individual with the challenge, not to, say, a parent setting up a trust, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I know how stressful it is for you every time you overspend and need to come to me, the trustee, for more money. I want to help you navigate this situation and prevent this from happening again in the future by being able to address the reasons you keep overspending. Are you willing to work with someone on this issue so that you don't have to end up in this uncomfortable position again?
What does that feel like to say those words?
I'm trying to help. I'm trying to be empathetic. I want them to be comfortable and not have to go through this difficult situation again.
You're connecting with them on something that's stressful for them. You're showing empathy. You're leaving the door open for possibilities without blaming. And you're saying that you're willing to work with them and partner with them in moving forward. And that's what all of these kinds of phrases sound like. When you walk through them, it feels a lot more comfortable to say these things than it does when you just imagine what you would say in your own head.
State the parameters. and for example, we said earlier that, we can't approve an expenditure of over $5,000 without 3 days, a business day delay. An expenditure over $10,000, we want an in-person meeting. Over 5,000, we want a Zoom meeting. These are the parameters I can work with. I want to create a way for you to win in this situation without me jeopardizing my job. Meaning, if I just simply make distributions as a beneficiary wants, my job as a trustee could be in jeopardy. What does winning look like for you within the parameters I have to work within?
And now it puts the burden of solving the problem on them. Because the truth is, most people will understand if your job is on the line, they can't ask you to jeopardize their job. And so they'll either calm down and say, oh, fine, 3 days is fine, and begrudgingly do it. But you stop being the enemy, and the burden of the solution stops being on you. And
It's
they just,
interesting.
if it's,
It shifts the imposition of the requirements to a higher up somewhere. I don't want to lose my job. I'm trying to help you, but I can't go beyond this. Can we work something out? I'm trying to help you.
Mhm.
I've noticed in the past months that you've sent me emails which feel urgent, aren't remembering conversations, and avoid getting on the phone with me. These changes seem abrupt and unlike you. I'm concerned and wanted to open the door to have a conversation. What do you think changed for you in the last month?
All of them feel really open, non-accusatory, and create a way for somebody to start a conversation based on things that they've noticed objectively.
Um, why don't you make some concluding comments? I'll make a few and we'll wrap up.
So mental health is a really complex terrain, and where mental health meets the law and trust documents and estate planning is also complex. The truth is, none of us are going to do it alone. And so by partnering together and realizing what that looks like in a best possible future for clients and beneficiaries, then we're all going to win together. And like going back to liability, no one carries the liability alone, which is a really good thing.
So I think it's important, very important, to remember some of the statistics that we talked about. 1 in 5 people can struggle with a mental health issue. Addiction, mental health issues, all sorts of these related challenges are not only common in society as a whole, despite this stigma, but they're very common amongst our wealthy clients. And I think we as advisors can all do a better job trying to help clients with these challenges. It's not easy. It's out of the comfort zone for most of us because we don't have specific training in it. And that's why we can bring in other third-party advisors, mental health professionals to help. But this is really something that we need to proactively address to help our clients. And it's really just one piece of the broader human dimension of estate planning. We all, as estate planners, love talking about an asset allocation or GST tax or all the things that we get all excited about on programs. But it's these personal, deep, difficult, messy, sometimes personal issues where we can have the most positive impact for the clients that we serve. So I encourage all of you to not shy away from addressing these issues. And hopefully we've given you some thoughts and ideas that will help guide you in pursuing it. So I want to thank Amanda for joining me on this program. I think she made a lot of great comments, and hopefully we've given you some food for thought. Amanda, anything else?
Thank you for having me.
Take care, everybody.